I'm Melissa Caldwell, 32, and yesterday I received a cream-colored envelope with my father's law firm letterhead. Inside, your presence is unwelcome at the family reunion. Don't try coming. I just texted back. Understood. What he doesn't know is that while I'm excluded from the Caldwell reunion, I'll be there anyway. Because sometimes understanding family betrayal means understanding how to make justice inevitable. After what they did with grandmother Eleanor's inheritance, they thought I'd disappear quietly. They have no idea what's coming. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or wondered what it's like when blood loyalty collides with harsh truth, my story might resonate with you. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments. Family dramas like mine happen everywhere, and I've learned that sometimes the most powerful response to rejection is simply understood, followed by action. If you value justice served cold, subscribe to see more stories of family karma coming full circle. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Caldwells are old New England money. Not Rockefeller rich, but comfortable enough that financial worries weren't part of my childhood vocabulary. Our colonial home in Massachusetts housed 3 generations: my father Richard, my older sister Amanda, my younger brother Travis, and my grandmother Eleanor, who practically raised me after my mother Rebecca died when I was 8. I was the middle child, not the firstborn pride of my father like Amanda, not the baby boy who could do no wrong like Travis. I was just there. The quiet one who preferred books to sports, who helped grandmother Eleanor with her gardening while my siblings competed for my father's attention. Richard Caldwell, senior partner at Caldwell and Associates law firm, was a formidable presence even in silence. His approval was currency in our household, and I always seemed to be running a deficit. You have your mother's thoughtfulness, grandmother Eleanor would tell me during our afternoon teas in her sunroom. That's a gift, Melissa. Remember that. She was my buffer against my father's indifference, my siblings' casual cruelty. In her presence, I felt seen. The Caldwell family dynamics weren't unusual on the surface. We attended the right schools, smiled for the right photographs, donated to the right charities. But beneath that veneer ran currents of favoritism so strong they could sweep you away if you weren't careful. My father called Amanda my brilliant girl when she followed him into law. He called Travis champ when he captained his college rowing team. He called me Melissa when he remembered to address me directly at all. Grandmother Eleanor noticed. Your father sees the world through a very narrow lens, she told me once. But that's his limitation, not yours. She encouraged my interest in art history, funded my semester abroad in Florence, celebrated my eventual position as assistant curator at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. When others saw it as a nice hobby rather than a career, she defended my choices. The Caldwell name doesn't have to mean lawyer or banker, she'd say, patting my hand. It can mean anything you make of it. Then, 6 months ago, grandmother Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep at 92. The house felt emptier, colder without her. At the funeral, I stood between Amanda and Travis, but felt miles apart from them. My father delivered a eulogy that sounded more like a resume recitation than a loving remembrance. I spoke too, sharing stories of her kindness, her wisdom, her secret chocolate chip cookie recipe that she only made when one of us was sad. Amanda rolled her eyes. Travis checked his watch. 1 week later came the reading of the will. We gathered in the formal dining room where attorney Joseph Bennett, my grandmother's personal lawyer for 40 years, began reading the document. Standard bequests came first: jewelry to cousins, art pieces to friends, charitable donations. Then the substantial parts. The family business shares were split mostly between my father and Amanda, who'd been working there for years. Travis received the summer house in Maine. Then, to my granddaughter Melissa, who has truly understood what matters in life, I leave Windermere Cottage in the Berkshires, my personal investment portfolio currently valued at $8 million, and my personal diaries and correspondence. The silence was deafening. Then it broke. This is ridiculous, my father snapped, face flushing red. There must be a mistake. She was clearly not in her right mind, Amanda added, glaring at me. Travis simply laughed, an ugly sound. What did you do, Mel? Manipulate an old woman? I sat frozen, as shocked as they were. Windermere Cottage was the family crown jewel, a historic property on 50 acres that had been in the family for generations. The investment portfolio was substantial, but what hurt most was their immediate assumption that I'd done something underhanded to deserve it. Attorney Bennett cleared his throat. Eleanor was of perfectly sound mind. She made these changes 2 years ago, and I personally verified her competence and intentions multiple times since then. We'll contest it, my father declared, standing up. She was 90 years old, for God's sake. I finally found my voice. Why would you do that? Grandmother wanted this. Because it's not right, Amanda hissed. You barely contribute to this family. What she means, Travis added with a smirk, is that you don't deserve it. Later that night, I overheard them in my father's study through the old heating vent that had served as my childhood intelligence network. We need to move quickly, my father was saying. I've already called Gerald at the firm. We can file to contest on grounds of undue influence. What about claiming she wasn't mentally competent? Amanda suggested. Even better, my father replied. We could argue that Melissa took advantage of Mother's declining mental state. Do we have evidence of that? Travis asked. We don't need much, Amanda replied. Just enough doubt. Dad can get Dr. Lowell to review her medical records. He owes you a favor, right? Several, my father confirmed. But we need something more. Melissa has always been calculated. She doesn't leave loose ends. Their voices dropped lower, and I strained to hear. What about her mental health? Amanda suggested. She saw that therapist in college after Mom died. Perfect, my father said. We could suggest she's unstable. Always has been. Mother was trying to help her by providing financial security, but wasn't thinking clearly about the consequences. I backed away from the vent, feeling physically ill. Not just at their plotting, but at how easily they crafted this narrative, how willing they were to destroy my reputation to get what they wanted. These were people who shared my blood, my home, my history. That night, I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. Instead, I began taking notes in a fresh journal, recording everything I'd heard, everything I remembered about Grandmother Eleanor's last years. If there was going to be a battle, I needed to be prepared. The quiet middle child had always been watching, listening. Now that would serve me well. The next morning at breakfast, I acted normal. Calm. As if I hadn't heard them planning to declare me mentally unfit. My father mentioned meeting with some colleagues that afternoon. Amanda talked about reviewing some family documents. Travis was surprisingly silent. When they left together after lunch, I searched my father's study. In his desk drawer, I found a draft legal letter challenging Grandmother's will, questioning her mental capacity and suggesting I had manipulated her. It was dated the day before the will reading. They had been planning this before even knowing what the will contained. In that moment, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about the inheritance. This was about them never seeing me, never valuing me, and now being willing to destroy me rather than accept Grandmother Eleanor's wishes. The family I thought I had, flawed but bound by some basic loyalty, didn't exist. So I began preparing for a war they didn't yet know was coming. Within 2 weeks, the family's united front against me became obvious to everyone. At my cousin Sarah's baby shower, Aunt Patricia pulled me aside. Melissa, dear, is everything all right? Your father mentioned you've been unstable lately. I maintained my composure. Did he give any examples? Her hesitation told me everything. Not specifically, but he seemed very concerned. This pattern repeated at every family gathering. Uncle Robert asked if I was getting help. Cousin Michael mentioned hearing I had episodes. Family friends suddenly became awkward around me. The narrative was spreading exactly as they'd planned. The legal notices began arriving soon after. First, a formal contest of the will. Then, a request for mental health evaluation as part of the proceedings. Finally, a motion to appoint a financial conservator to protect my interests while the case was decided, with my father volunteering for the role. Each document was more insulting than the last, but I responded through proper legal channels, maintaining a dignified silence in person. I hired my own attorney, Catherine Wright, who specialized in estate disputes. She was surprised at the aggression of their approach. "They're coming at you with everything they've got," she said, reviewing the documents. "This level of attack usually indicates there's something they're very afraid of." "Like what?" I asked. "Like you knowing something that could damage them," she replied. "This isn't just about money. This is about control." Meanwhile, I still lived in the family home, though the atmosphere had turned glacial. Amanda accidentally spilled coffee on my museum presentation notes. Travis made pointed comments about gold diggers whenever I entered a room. My father simply pretended I didn't exist, speaking through others when communication was necessary. I began spending more time at Windermere Cottage, the property now legally mine despite their challenges. The beautiful old house became my sanctuary. While organizing grandmother Eleanor's belongings there, I discovered she had kept meticulous records of family matters. Correspondence, financial documents, journals, all carefully preserved in her office. But something was missing. In her journals, she referenced letters and personal diaries she called her truth papers, yet I couldn't find them at Windermere. According to her notes, these contained information the family needs to know when I'm gone. She'd written that she kept them, where Richard would never look but Melissa might. The next day, I returned to the main house when everyone was out. I went directly to grandmother Eleanor's old room, which had remained largely untouched since her death. Where would my father never look? I searched methodically until I checked the antique sewing table I had always admired as a child. The one with the hidden compartment that grandmother had shown only me. Empty. Frustrated, I moved to my father's study. If the papers contained something damaging to him, he might have found and hidden them. I searched carefully, conscious of leaving everything exactly as I found it. Nothing in the desk. Nothing in the bookshelves. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the family portrait on the wall, the one taken when I was 12, my mother already 3 years gone. Behind the portrait was a wall safe I'd never known existed. I couldn't open it, but now I knew where to look. That evening, Amanda cornered me in the kitchen. "We know you were in Dad's study," she said, arms crossed. "The cleaning lady saw you." I kept my expression neutral. "I was looking for my birth certificate for the court proceedings." "In his private safe?" She raised an eyebrow. "So they knew I'd found it. Interesting." "I didn't open any safe," I replied truthfully. "I was just looking in the obvious places." "Stay out of his things," she warned. "And just so you know, we've documented everything in that safe with our lawyers. If anything goes missing, we'll know." The next day, I received a formal cease and desist letter from my father's firm, accusing me of unauthorized access to private property and threatening further legal action. The letter also informed me that all locks in the house had been changed, and I would need to remove my belongings by the end of the month. I was being evicted from my childhood home. Rather than argue, I packed my essential belongings and moved temporarily to a hotel, then later to Windermere. Each aggressive move they made revealed more about their fear. But what were they so afraid I'd find? The answer came unexpectedly. While having lunch at my favorite cafe, I ran into Beverly Thomas, grandmother Eleanor's former private nurse. "Oh, Melissa," she said, embracing me warmly. "I've been thinking about you since Eleanor passed. How are you holding up with everything?" "It's been difficult," I admitted. "There are some family complications with the will." Beverly's expression darkened. "I'm not surprised. Your grandmother warned me this might happen. That's why she gave me something for you." My heart raced. "She did." Beverly nodded. "About 6 months before she passed, she asked me to keep an envelope for you. Said to give it to you if anything unusual happened after she was gone." The envelope contained a key and a note in grandmother Eleanor's elegant handwriting, "For the deposit box at First National. The truth is there. Be brave, little one." The next morning, I went to First National Bank and accessed the safe deposit box. Inside was a thick folder labeled Richard and a set of journals tied with ribbon. A note on top read, "Melissa, if you're reading this, They've tried to take what's rightfully yours. These will help you understand why. I'm sorry for the pain this will cause, but some truths can't stay buried forever. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor. That evening, I sat in my hotel room and read through everything. By midnight, I understood why my father had been so desperate to discredit me and control the narrative. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Attorney Bennett, Grandmother Eleanor's lawyer, and requested an urgent meeting. When I arrived at his office, I placed the documents on his desk. "I need to know if you were aware of all this," I said. He reviewed the papers silently, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I knew some of it," he finally admitted. "Not all. Eleanor protected you, as much as she could. Did she know what would happen when she left me the inheritance?" He nodded slowly. "She knew it would force certain truths to light. She believed you were strong enough to handle it. And the rest of the family? She hoped they would eventually accept the truth. But she was realistic about Richard's nature." That afternoon, I returned to the family home to collect the rest of my belongings. My father was waiting in the foyer. "I've been patient," he said coldly. "But this ends now. Sign over Windermere and the portfolio, and we can forget this unpleasantness." I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. The man who had ignored me for years. The man who is now trying to destroy my reputation rather than accept his mother's wishes. "No," I said simply. His face hardened. "Then you're no longer my daughter. Don't try to contact me or your siblings again." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Is that your final decision?" "It is," he replied. "You're out of the family. Permanently." I nodded and turned to leave. From the living room, I could hear Amanda and Travis laughing, celebrating my exclusion. "I understand," I said and walked out the door. What my father didn't know was that I finally understood everything. And understanding was the first step toward justice. Grandmother Eleanor's journals began in 1980, the year my mother Rebecca came to work as a legal assistant at Caldwell and Associates. Her early entries described my mother as bright, ambitious, trapped by circumstance. Rebecca had dreams of becoming a lawyer herself, but lacked the financial means for law school. "Richard has taken an interest in Rebecca," Grandmother wrote in 1981. "I worry his interest is more about possession than affection. The girl deserves better, but she seems dazzled by him." They married in 1982. Amanda was born in 1984, followed by me in 1989. The journals documented a marriage that quickly cooled, with my father absorbed in work and my mother increasingly isolated. Then came the entry that changed everything, dated March 1988. "Rebecca came to me in tears today. She's pregnant again, but the child isn't Richard's. She's been involved with James Harrington for nearly a year. I'm not surprised. James treats her with the respect Richard never has. She's terrified of what Richard will do if he discovers the truth." James Harrington, my father's business partner at the time. "I've counseled Rebecca to tell Richard the truth, but she fears losing Amanda. He would never let her take his child in a divorce. So, she's decided to pass the baby off as his. I don't approve of the deception, but I understand her impossible position." I set the journal down, hands shaking. I wasn't Richard Caldwell's daughter. The man who had always treated me differently kept me at a distance he had known all along. Further entries confirmed it. Richard knows the truth about the baby. I saw his expression when Melissa was born. She has James's eyes, unmistakably. But he said nothing to Rebecca. I fear his silence more than his rage. Richard treats little Melissa differently. Not cruelly, but distantly. Rebecca notices and tries to compensate by giving her extra attention, which only makes Richard more resentful. Rebecca's illness progresses. The doctors give her months, not years. Her greatest fear is what will happen to Melissa without her protection. I've promised to watch over the child. It's the least I can do. After my mother died when I was 8, Grandmother Eleanor became my primary caretaker. Now I understood why she had been so protective, why she had worked so hard to build my confidence and independence. The journals documented how my father's emotional neglect evolved into something more calculated after my mother's death. Richard has begun systematically undermining Melissa's confidence. Nothing direct that I can confront him about, just constant small dismissals, comparing her unfavorably to Amanda and Travis. The child tries so hard to earn his approval, not understanding it will never come. I've spoken to Richard about his treatment of Melissa. He says I'm imagining things, but there was something cold in his eyes. She's not a true Caldwell, he said, as if that justifies his behavior. Beyond these personal revelations, the documents revealed something even more disturbing. Financial records showing my father had been systematically misappropriating funds from grandmother Eleanor's personal accounts for years. Forged signatures on financial documents. Evidence he had manipulated her into signing certain papers by misrepresenting their contents. There were also records of tax fraud in the family business, shell companies created to hide assets, and embezzlement from client accounts. The scope of it was staggering. A separate letter addressed specifically to me explained grandmother Eleanor's decision about the inheritance. Dearest Melissa, I've left you Windermere and the portfolio because they are mine to give, free and clear of the family business. Richard can't touch them without exposing his own misconduct. I know this inheritance will force difficult truths to light, but you deserve to know your true history and to be free of Richard's control. The man you've known as your father has allowed resentment to poison his heart. The truth about your parentage doesn't excuse his behavior, but perhaps it helps explain it. I've included everything I know about James Harrington. He never knew about you. Rebecca felt it would complicate an impossible situation. But perhaps it's time you found each other. The last page contained James Harrington's last known contact information. After leaving Caldwell and Associates, he had started his own practice in Chicago, specializing in corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 3 days of processing this information, I contacted James Harrington. His secretary initially thought I was a potential client, but when I explained who I was and why I was calling, she immediately put me through. "This is James," said a deep voice that somehow felt familiar. "Mr. Harrington," I began, my prepared speech disappearing. "My name is Melissa Caldwell. I believe you knew my mother, Rebecca Caldwell." A long pause. Yes, I knew Rebecca. Very well, in fact. I recently discovered some information that suggests that indicates. I took a deep breath. "I have reason to believe you're my biological father." The silence stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Are you still there?" I asked. "I'm here," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I always wondered. There was something about the timing when Rebecca told me she was pregnant, but she insisted it was Richard's. I respected her marriage, even though..." He trailed off. "Even though what?" "Even though I loved her," he said simply. I never stopped loving her. We talked for nearly 2 hours. James had never married, had dedicated himself to his practice after leaving Boston. He asked dozens of questions about my life, my interests, my work at the museum. Unlike Richard, he seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person. "I'd like to meet you," he said finally, "if you're comfortable with that." 2 weeks later, I flew to Chicago. James met me at the airport, and the resemblance was immediately apparent. We had the same eyes, the same gesture of pushing our hair back when thinking. Over dinner, he showed me photos of his parents, my grandparents, and his sister and her children, my aunt and cousins I'd never known existed. "I wish I'd known," he said more than once. "I would have been there for you." "You couldn't have known," I assured him. "Mom made her choice to protect everyone involved." "Not everyone," he said sadly. "Not you." During my week in Chicago, James introduced me to his family, who welcomed me with an openness that felt foreign after years with the Caldwells. His sister Diane hugged me tightly and said, "You have the Harrington eyes. Welcome home." Home. The concept had always been complicated for me. The Caldwell house had been a physical home but rarely an emotional one. Windermere felt like grandmother Eleanor's space, not yet mine. But sitting in James's comfortable living room, surrounded by people who seemed genuinely happy to discover my existence, I felt something shift inside me. Before I left Chicago, James and I had a serious conversation about the documents I'd found. What Richard has done goes beyond family dysfunction, James said, reviewing the evidence. Some of this is criminal. I know, I replied. The question is what to do about it. James looked at me thoughtfully. What do you want, Melissa? Revenge? Justice? Or just to move on with your life? I considered his question carefully. I want the truth acknowledged. I want grandmother Eleanor's wishes respected. And I want them to understand they can't simply discard people who don't serve their purposes. He nodded. Then we need a strategy. And I think I can help. I returned to Massachusetts with a clearer sense of purpose and, for the first time, the unconditional support of family, just not the family I'd grown up with. My first call after returning from Chicago was to cousin Sophie. 10 years earlier, she had been effectively excommunicated from family gatherings after confronting Uncle William about his alcoholism and its impact on her cousins. The family response had been swift and merciless. Sophie was labeled unstable and attention-seeking, and gradually excluded from all family events. Melissa? She sounded surprised to hear from me. It's been ages. I know, and I'm sorry about that, I said sincerely. I've recently discovered some things about our family that made me think of you. Let me guess, she replied dryly. You've fallen from grace? Spectacularly, I confirmed. She laughed. Welcome to the club of Caldwell outcasts. What did you do to earn your membership? Inherited Windermere and a sizable portfolio from grandmother Eleanor. A low whistle. That would do it. Richard must be apoplectic. He's disowned me and is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. Sounds familiar, she said. When can we meet? Over coffee the next day. I shared the full story. Sophie listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if pieces were falling into place. I always wondered why Uncle Richard treated you differently, she said when I finished. This explains a lot. You noticed? I was surprised. Everyone noticed, Melissa. We just didn't understand it. She leaned forward. So, what's your plan now? I'm still figuring that out. But I know I can't let them rewrite history and take what grandmother wanted me to have. Sophie's expression hardened. Then you'll need allies. The Caldwells' close ranks against threats. I learned that the hard way. Will you help me? Absolutely, she said without hesitation. And I know others who will too. Over the next few weeks, Sophie introduced me to a network of people who had experienced the darker side of the Caldwell family dynamics. Former employees who had been unfairly dismissed, business associates who had been cheated, even distant relatives who had been systematically excluded for questioning family decisions. One particularly valuable connection was Margaret Wilson, grandmother Eleanor's oldest friend and bridge partner. At 88, Margaret's mind was still razor-sharp, and her memory of family events went back decades. Eleanor confided in me about your situation. Margaret told me over tea at her retirement community. She was deeply troubled by Richard's treatment of you, but felt constrained in what she could do while she was alive. The inheritance was her way of finally setting things right. Did she tell you about my real father? Margaret nodded.
She did.
She also told me about Richard's financial manipulations. Eleanor wasn't as oblivious as Richard believed. She kept records of everything. I found some documents, I acknowledged, but I suspect there's more. There is, Margaret confirmed. Eleanor created a failsafe. She left certain evidence with multiple people, with instructions to come forward if her will was contested. Through Margaret, I connected with Eleanor's former accountant, Harold Simpson, who had been replaced 5 years earlier when he questioned certain transactions. Harold had kept copies of financial records showing discrepancies in Eleanor's accounts that coincided with large deposits to offshore accounts linked to my father. I couldn't prove he was stealing from her, Harold explained, but the patterns were suspicious enough that I felt obligated to raise concerns. The next week, I was informed my services were no longer required. With Harold's help, I engaged Rachel Chen, a forensic accountant specializing in financial fraud investigations. Rachel methodically analyzed the records I had gathered, identifying patterns of systematic theft and tax evasion going back nearly 20 years. This is an opportunistic misappropriation, Rachel explained, pointing to highlighted sections of her report. This is calculated long-term fraud. And based on these documents, it wasn't just Eleanor's money. There appear to be irregularities with client funds from the law firm as well. I felt sick thinking about the scope of my father's deception. Is it enough evidence for legal action? It's certainly enough to trigger formal investigations by the Bar Association and potentially the IRS, Rachel confirmed. But you should understand what that would mean. This could destroy the family business and potentially result in criminal charges. The weight of that potential consequence sat heavily with me. Despite everything, these were still people I had known all my life. Amanda had been my playmate before she became my tormentor. Travis had once brought me ice cream when I was sick with tonsillitis. My father, well, there had been moments of what I had interpreted as warmth, though now I questioned even those memories. If I've been watching your story so far, you might be wondering how I felt learning that the man who raised me wasn't my biological father, or discovering the extent of my family's betrayal. The truth is, it was like watching the pieces of a puzzle finally fit together. Those moments when I felt like an outsider in my own family suddenly made sense. The constant feeling of trying to earn love that never came. It wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because nothing I did could change the fundamental fact that Richard saw me as living proof of his wife's infidelity. Have you ever had that moment when your entire understanding of your life shifts? When something that never made sense suddenly becomes crystal clear. If you have, share your experience in the comments. I found that connecting with others who've had similar revelations was incredibly healing during this time. While building my case, I continued developing my relationship with James and my newfound family. James introduced me to his my half-siblings, from his father's second marriage, Daniel, 35, and Julia, 33. Unlike the competitive relationship I'd had with Amanda and Travis, Daniel and Julia welcomed me with genuine enthusiasm. We always wanted a sister, Julia told me during a video call. Dad told us about you right away. We've been dying to meet you. The contrast between the Harrington family's warm acceptance and the Caldwell's rejection couldn't have been starker. While my Caldwell relatives were plotting to declare me mentally unfit, my Harrington relatives were rearranging their schedules to fly out and meet me. James, who specialized in whistleblower cases, helped me understand my legal options. The evidence you have could trigger several types of investigations, he explained. The challenge is timing and coordination. If you want maximum impact, these revelations need to be carefully orchestrated. With James's guidance, I began preparing documentation packages tailored to different audiences: the State Bar Association regarding ethical violations, the IRS concerning tax fraud, the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges, and the family members who had been kept in the dark about Richard's activities. Meanwhile, I continued monitoring my father and siblings through mutual acquaintances and social media. Amanda had been named partner at the firm. Travis had announced his engagement to Brittany Winthrop, daughter of a prominent Boston family. And preparations were underway for the annual Caldwell family reunion, an elaborate affair held each summer at the Fairmont Estate, a historic venue owned by distant Caldwell relatives. Through a former household employee still in contact with the family, I learned that this year's reunion had added significance. My father planned to announce a major restructuring of the family business, effectively consolidating his control and positioning Amanda as his successor. The timing wasn't coincidental. The announcement would precede by 1 week a scheduled court date for the final hearing on my grandmother's will. "They're circling the wagons," James observed when I shared this information, making it harder for anyone to challenge Richard's authority once everything's formalized. As the reunion date approached, I continued building my support network and preparing my evidence. Sophie helped me reconnect with family members who might be sympathetic to my situation. Margaret facilitated meetings with Eleanor's former associates who had their own stories about Richard's manipulations. James provided legal guidance and emotional support. I also began working with Dr. Samantha Rivera, a therapist specializing in family trauma, to prepare myself emotionally for the confrontation to come. What you're planning will be extremely stressful, Dr. Rivera cautioned. You'll be facing people who have hurt you deeply, who will likely attack you verbally and emotionally when confronted. We need to develop strategies for maintaining your composure. Through role-playing exercises and mindfulness techniques, I practiced responding calmly to the types of accusations and gaslighting I expected from my father and siblings. Dr. Rivera helped me identify my emotional triggers and develop coping mechanisms for managing them in real time. Remember, their reactions reflect their issues, not your worth, she reminded me repeatedly. 2 weeks before the reunion, I received the formal letter from my father. Your presence is unwelcome at the family reunion. Don't try coming. It was delivered by courier, requiring a signature, a particularly cold touch designed to ensure I couldn't claim ignorance of the prohibition. I texted back a single word. Understood. What my father didn't realize was that I truly did understand, far more than he could imagine. And I was ready to show him just how much. With the family reunion just 10 days away, I gathered my core team at Windermere Cottage: James, Sophie, Rachel the forensic accountant, and Catherine my attorney. Spread across the dining room table were documents, photographs, and timeline charts, the accumulated evidence of decades of manipulation and fraud. The IRS whistleblower program could be valuable here, Rachel explained, pointing to sections of her report highlighting tax evasion. If the information leads to recovery of funds, you could be eligible for a percentage as a reward. I'm not interested in more money, I clarified. I just want the truth acknowledged. The reward isn't the point, James added. The whistleblower program provides a structured process for the investigation. It prevents the evidence from being buried or dismissed. Catherine nodded agreement. Additionally, once we file with the IRS, it creates a record that can't be easily erased. That's important given Richard's connections in Boston. Over the next 3 days, we finalized the IRS whistleblower submission with Rachel's help. The documentation was comprehensive, detailing specific instances of tax fraud, false reporting, and hidden assets. James reviewed everything from a legal perspective, ensuring the submission would be taken seriously. Now we need to think about the family business partners, Sophie suggested. Several have been affected by Uncle Richard's schemes. Through Harold Simpson's connections, I arranged discreet meetings with 3 former business associates my father had betrayed over the years. Thomas Reynolds, who had lost millions in a deal where my father had concealed material information; Victor Martinez, whose client had been overcharged for years through fraudulent billing practices; and Jennifer Westfield, who had been forced out of a partnership after raising ethical concerns. I always knew something wasn't right, Jennifer said during our meeting. But Richard is masterful at making whistleblowers look like the problem. Would you be willing to come forward now? I asked. As part of a coordinated effort? She hesitated. What exactly are you planning? A reckoning, I replied simply. A chance for the truth to finally come out. One by one, they agreed to support my efforts, providing additional statements and evidence that corroborated the patterns I had already documented. Next came the delicate task of reaching out to family members who had been kept in the dark about Richard's activities. My approach had to be careful, too direct, and they might alert my father; too vague, and they wouldn't take me seriously. Sophie suggested a strategy. Start with Anne Elizabeth. She's always been fair-minded, and she was close to grandmother Eleanor. I crafted a brief, non-accusatory letter to Anne Elizabeth, simply stating that I had discovered concerning information about the family finances that might affect her directly and would welcome a private conversation before the reunion. I included copies of 2 documents showing discrepancies in grandmother Eleanor's accounts that directly impacted Elizabeth's expected inheritance. She called the next day. Melissa, what is this about? These numbers don't match what Richard showed us. I know, I replied. That's just the beginning. There's more, but I'd rather discuss it in person. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant outside the city. I brought selected documents, enough to establish the pattern of deception, but not so much as to overwhelm her. Elizabeth's expression shifted from skepticism to shock to anger as she reviewed the evidence. That bastard, she finally said, surprising me with her language. Eleanor always said I was too trusting where Richard was concerned. Does anyone else in the family know? Not yet, I admitted. I'm being selective about who I approach. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. Well, you can count me in. And my husband too. George always said Richard was too smooth to be trusted. Who else are you telling? With Elizabeth's help, I connected with other family members who might be receptive. Cousin Peter, who had questioned some family business decisions in the past, Uncle David, who had a background in finance and would understand the implications of the evidence, and Aunt Margaret, who had been Eleanor's confidant on many matters. One by one, small groups of family members were brought into the circle of trust. Not everyone was convinced. Some remained loyal to my father despite the evidence. But enough were disturbed by what they saw to create a significant faction within the family. As the reunion approached, I also worked on my own emotional preparation. Dr. Rivera and I had regular sessions focused on maintaining composure under pressure. Your father will try to provoke an emotional reaction, she warned. That's been his pattern, making you appear unstable while he remains controlled. I know, I acknowledged. It's worked in the past. Because you are still seeking his approval, she pointed out. Are you now? I considered the question carefully. No. I don't need anything from him anymore. She smiled. That's your power. Remember that when you're facing him. We practice scenarios, my father's likely accusations, Amanda's cutting remarks, Travis's dismissive comments. I rehearsed calm, factual responses, focusing on breathing techniques to manage anxiety in the moment. James flew in 5 days before the reunion to help with final preparations. Together, we organized the documentation into clear presentation packages, each labeled and cross-referenced. We prepared digital backups and securely stored copies with multiple trusted individuals. Remember, James cautioned, once this starts, there's no stopping it. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I looked at the family photos on my wall. My mother holding me as a baby, grandmother Eleanor teaching me to garden, even old pictures of all of us together before the fractures became too deep. Then I looked at the more recent photos of my new Harrington family members, the welcome they had extended without hesitation or condition. I'm certain, I replied. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore. It's about truth. Grandmother Eleanor wanted the truth known, or she wouldn't have left me those documents. The day before the reunion, I received confirmation that key players would be in position. Rachel would attend as my financial advisor, Catherine as my legal counsel, Thomas Reynolds and Jennifer Westfield would arrive as business associates, and various family members would be prepared to speak up at critical moments. That evening, I returned to my hotel room to find another letter had been delivered. This one was even more explicit. Melissa, this is your final warning. The security team at Fairmont Estate has been provided with your photograph and instructions to deny you entry. Any attempt to disrupt the family reunion will result in immediate legal action for harassment and trespassing. Richard Caldwell. I placed the letter with the others in my evidence file. Then I sent a simple text message to my father's phone. Understood. In the silence of my hotel room, I reviewed the plan one final time. Every detail had been considered, every contingency addressed. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not the numbness of shock or the heat of anger, but the steady resolve of someone who knows they're doing what's necessary and right. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. The morning of the Caldwell family reunion dawned clear and warm. I woke at 6, performed the meditation exercises Dr. Rivera had taught me, and methodically prepared for the day ahead. My outfit was carefully chosen, a conservative navy blue dress that had belonged to grandmother Eleanor, altered to fit me perfectly. Her pearl earrings. Low heels for stability. I wanted to embody her dignity today. James met me for breakfast at 7. How are you feeling? He asked, studying my face. Surprisingly calm, I replied. Like everything has been leading to this moment. It has been, he agreed. But remember, whatever happens today doesn't define you. You've already won by refusing to be silenced. My half-siblings Daniel and Julia had flown in the previous evening and joined us at 8. Their presence was unexpected moral support. I had told them they didn't need to come, but they had insisted. Family shows up, Julia said simply, hugging me. Real family. By 9, our team had assembled in the hotel conference room for a final briefing. Rachel reviewed the financial evidence once more. Catherine confirmed our legal positions. Sophie reported on which family members were confirmed allies. Everyone knew their roles. The reunion officially begins at 11. I reminded everyone. Richard's announcement is scheduled for 2 o'clock. We'll arrive at 1:30, which gives us time to get into position but doesn't leave much opportunity for them to regroup or remove us before the main event. At 1:15, our small convoy of cars approached the Fairmont estate. The historic mansion sat on 20 acres of manicured grounds, with a circular driveway leading to imposing front steps. 2 security guards stood at the entrance, checking invitations. As expected, they stepped forward when I approached. "I'm sorry, Ms. Caldwell," the taller one said, not sounding sorry at all. "We have instructions that you're not permitted on the premises today." I smiled politely. "I understand. However, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I opened my portfolio and removed a document. This is the deed to Fairmont Estate. As you can see, ownership was transferred to me 3 weeks ago. The guard frowned, examining the paper. "This can't be right. The Fairmont has been in the Palmer family for generations." "The Palmers are distant Caldwell relatives," I explained. "Eliza Palmer was grandmother Eleanor's cousin. When she passed away last year, the estate went to her son Jeffrey, who has been experiencing financial difficulties. I purchased the property from him at fair market value." I handed over another document. "Here's written authorization from Mr. Palmer confirming I'm hosting today's event." The security guards exchanged uncertain glances. The second one stepped away to make a phone call. "I'd be happy to wait while you verify," I offered graciously. "But I should mention that as the legal owner of this property, I could have you removed for obstructing my access. I'd prefer not to start our professional relationship that way." 5 minutes later, we were escorted inside without further comment. The guards' expressions suggested they had received confirmation of my ownership, but not new instructions regarding my access. The Great Hall was already filled with Caldwell family members and associates, approximately 70 people mingling over champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Conversations faltered as I entered with my group. Heads turned. Whispers spread. Amanda spotted me first. Her champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, then nearly slipped from her fingers. She recovered quickly, setting it down and striding purposefully toward me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid causing a scene. "You were explicitly told not to come." "I own the venue," I replied calmly. "I can hardly be denied entry to my own property." Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Perhaps you should ask Father about Jeffrey Palmer's financial situation," I suggested. "They've been keeping it quiet, but the Palmers lost most of their money in some unfortunate investments. Jeffrey needed to liquidate assets quickly. I made him a fair offer." Amanda's expression shifted from shock to calculation. "Whatever game you're playing, it's not a game," I interrupted quietly. "It's a reckoning." My father appeared at Amanda's side, his face a rigid mask of control. "Melissa, you need to leave immediately." "I don't think so, Richard," I replied, deliberately using his first name. "I have as much right to be here as anyone. More, actually, considering I own the building." His eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." "Check the county records," I suggested. "The transaction was completed 3 weeks ago." Before he could respond, I moved past them into the hall, my group following. James stayed close beside me, a reassuring presence. Sophie guided me toward allies she had positioned strategically around the room. For the next hour, I circulated through the gathering, greeting family members I hadn't seen in months. Some were coldly polite, others warmly supportive, depending on their alignment in the family conflict. Through it all, I maintained a calm, dignified demeanor, conscious of how it contrasted with my father's visible tension. At precisely 2 o'clock, my father stepped onto the small raised platform at one end of the hall. A microphone had been set up for his announcement. Amanda and Travis stood on either side of him, presenting a united family front. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" he began, his practiced public voice filling the room. "Thank you all for coming to our annual family reunion. As you know, this tradition began with my grandfather Charles Caldwell and continues to be an important way for us to strengthen family bonds and connections." The irony of his emphasis on family bonds wasn't lost on anyone who knew the truth. I caught Sophie's eye across the room, and she gave me a subtle nod. Everything was in position. "Today, I'm pleased to announce some important changes to the family business structure," my father continued. "Caldwell and Associates has served our community for over 70 years, and to ensure its continued success, we're implementing a succession plan that will carry us into the future." He began detailing the restructuring that would solidify his control and position Amanda as his successor. Travis would receive a significant ownership stake despite having no involvement in the firm's operations. The arrangement effectively excluded other family members who had worked at the firm for years. As he spoke, I moved quietly toward the platform, positioning myself at the side opposite my siblings. My father faltered briefly when he noticed me, then continued with renewed determination. I waited patiently until he reached his conclusion. "And so, with these changes, we secure the Caldwell legacy for generations to come. Thank you." Polite applause followed. Before he could step away from the microphone, I moved forward. "If I might add something to that announcement," I said clearly. The room fell silent. My father's face hardened. "This is not the time or place, Melissa," he warned. "I disagree," I replied, stepping onto the platform. "This is exactly the time and place when the entire family is gathered to discuss our shared future." I turned to address the room. "For those who don't know me well, I'm Melissa Caldwell, Eleanor Caldwell's granddaughter. 6 months ago, grandmother Eleanor left me Windermere Cottage and her personal investment portfolio. This inheritance has been contested by my father and siblings, who have suggested I manipulated my grandmother or that she wasn't mentally competent." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I held up a hand. "I'm not here to argue about the inheritance. I'm here because grandmother Eleanor left me something far more valuable than property or money. She left me the truth." I nodded to Sophie, who distributed manila envelopes to key family members throughout the room. "In those packets, you'll find documented evidence of systematic financial fraud committed by Richard Caldwell over the past 20 years. Misappropriation of funds from Eleanor Caldwell's accounts, tax evasion through offshore entities, embezzlement from client accounts at Caldwell and Associates." Gasps and exclamations filled the room as people began examining the contents of the envelopes. "Melissa, that's enough," my father snapped, reaching for the microphone. I held my ground. "No, it's not nearly enough. Because the financial crimes, serious as they are, aren't the whole story." I nodded to James, who stepped forward and handed me a second set of documents. "Grandmother Eleanor left me her personal journals and correspondence," I continued. "They reveal that Richard Caldwell has known for my entire life that I am not his biological daughter." The room erupted in shocked conversations. My father's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Amanda looked stunned. Travis confused. "My mother Rebecca had a relationship with James Harrington," I explained, gesturing to James, who stood supportively at my side. "Richard discovered this when I was born but chose to keep the knowledge secret, using it instead as justification for years of emotional neglect and manipulation." My father lunged for the microphone. "These are lies. She's unstable, just as I've been telling you all. The DNA test results are in the packet," I cut in calmly. "Along with grandmother Eleanor's detailed accounts of your behavior toward me after my mother's death." The noise in the room crescendoed as family members absorbed this information. Uncle David, who had been reviewing the financial documents, stood up. "Richard, these financial records appear legitimate," he said gravely. "Are you denying their authenticity?" Before my father could respond, Aunt Elizabeth joined in. And these letters from Eleanor, this is definitely her handwriting. She describes conversations where you admitted knowing about Melissa's paternity. As more family members began asking questions, the careful facade my father had maintained for decades began visibly crumbling. Amanda attempted damage control, trying to dismiss the documents as fabrications, but Rachel stepped forward with her forensic analysis, methodically explaining how the financial evidence had been verified. Travis, looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke up. "Dad, is any of this true? Did you know Melissa wasn't your daughter?" My father's expression hardened. "This is not the time or place. It's a simple question," Travis pressed, surprising everyone with his persistence. "Did you know?" The moment stretched taut as my father realized he was losing control of the narrative. His eyes darted around the room, assessing his remaining support. "Yes," he finally admitted, his voice cold. "I knew. Rebecca betrayed me with James." The child was a constant reminder of that betrayal. The admission hung in the air, confirming everything. "That doesn't justify financial fraud," Uncle David pointed out, still reviewing the documents. "Or manipulating your mother's finances," Aunt Margaret added. "Or lying to the entire family for decades," Cousin Peter chimed in. My father attempted to regain control, insisting the financial matters were complicated but legal, that family matters should remain private. But the evidence was too comprehensive, the witnesses too credible. When Thomas Reynolds and Jennifer Westfield identified themselves and shared their experiences with my father's business practices, the last pillars of support began crumbling. The final blow came when two men in suits entered the hall and approached my father. "Richard Caldwell?" one asked formally. "Yes," he replied, visibly annoyed at the interruption. "I'm Special Agent Morris with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. This is Agent Benson. We'd like to speak with you regarding some financial discrepancies that have been brought to our attention." As my father was escorted from the room for questioning, Amanda hurried after them, already in damage control mode. Travis lingered, looking lost and confused. I approached him quietly. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said sincerely. He shook his head. He always favored me and Amanda so obviously. I thought it was because we were more like him. I never imagined. It wasn't your fault, I assured him. We were all manipulated in different ways. He nodded slowly. What happens now? I looked around the room, where family members were still processing the revelations, forming new alliances and understandings in real time. Now, I said, we start over, with the truth. The immediate aftermath of the family reunion was, predictably, chaos. My father was interviewed by IRS investigators for hours that day, though not formally charged. That would come later, after more thorough investigation. Amanda alternated between attempts to discredit me and frantic efforts to distance herself from her father's actions. Travis, surprisingly, reached out the following day. "I need to understand everything," he said when we met at a quiet cafe. "Not just about Dad, but about Grandmother Eleanor, about you, about all of it." I shared with him the complete set of journals and documents, watching as he worked through decades of family history from a completely new perspective. "I feel like my entire life has been a performance," he admitted after reading for hours. "Playing the role of the golden son in a family that wasn't what I thought it was." "I understand that feeling," I told him. Finding out Richard isn't my biological father actually explained so much. It was painful, but also clarifying. Travis looked up from the papers. "I was awful to you sometimes. Following Dad's lead, trying to earn his approval. You were a child," I said. "We all were, trying to navigate a dysfunctional situation we didn't create." In the weeks that followed, various family members approached me individually. Some apologized for believing the worst about me. Others shared their own experiences of manipulation by my father. A few remained loyal to him despite the evidence, unable or unwilling to reorganize their understanding of family history. Amanda maintained her distance initially, focused on saving what she could of the family business. The evidence of financial misconduct had triggered multiple investigations, and clients were leaving the firm in droves. Eventually, however, she requested a meeting. "I won't apologize," she said bluntly when we sat down. "I was protecting the family legacy."
No, i correcte gently.
"You were protecting Richard's version of the family legacy. There's a difference." She didn't respond directly to that. "What do you want now?" "The firm is basically worthless with the scandal. Are you happy?" "I never wanted to destroy the firm," I explained. "I wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted Grandmother Eleanor's wishes respected. Those were my only goals." Amanda studied me skeptically. "And now I think we have an opportunity to rebuild something honest. The firm has good attorneys, a solid client base apart from Richard's influence. With ethical leadership, it could recover." "Are you suggesting I step down?" she asked sharply. "I'm suggesting we work with an ethics consultant to create transparency and proper oversight. The Caldwell name doesn't have to be synonymous with scandal. We can change that narrative." It wasn't an immediate reconciliation. There was too much history, too much hurt for that. But it was a beginning. Amanda agreed to consider working with consultants to salvage what could be saved of the firm. My father's legal troubles progressed as expected. The evidence was too substantial to dismiss or explain away. He ultimately faced charges of tax evasion, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Rather than risk a public trial that would expose even more family secrets, he accepted a plea deal that included restitution, fines, and a 2-year prison sentence. Before he reported to the minimum security facility where he would serve his time, he requested to see me. Against the advice of many, I agreed to the meeting. We sat across from each other in the formal living room of what had been our family home, now being prepared for sale to cover part of the restitution payments. "Why did you do it?" he asked without preamble. "Was it revenge?" I considered the question carefully. It wasn't revenge. It was justice for Grandmother Eleanor, for myself, for everyone you manipulated over the years. "I provided for you," he countered. "Despite knowing you weren't mine. Many men wouldn't have." "You provided materially," I acknowledged. "But you withheld the emotional support every child needs. You punished me for something I had no part in." He had no response to that. "I didn't come here expecting an apology," I continued. "I came because I want you to know that despite everything, I'm grateful for the good parts of my upbringing. And I forgive you for the rest." His expression revealed genuine surprise. "You forgive me?" "Not for your sake," I clarified. "For mine. Carrying anger and resentment would only continue to let you influence my life. I'm choosing to move forward." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation scene. There were no tears or embraces. But something shifted in that conversation, a recognition, perhaps, that the truth had finally been spoken aloud between us. In the months that followed, I focused on honoring Grandmother Eleanor's legacy. I used a portion of the inheritance to establish a scholarship fund in her name, specifically for students interested in ethics and advocacy for the elderly. I also worked with Anne Elizabeth to distribute Eleanor's personal mementos to family members as she had intended before my father interfered. Windermere Cottage became a gathering place for both sides of my family. James visited regularly, our father-daughter relationship deepening with time. His children, my half-siblings, became close friends. The Harrington family welcomed me without reservation, filling gaps I hadn't fully recognized in my life. The Caldwell side took longer to heal. Some relationships were permanently altered or lost. Others strengthened through the shared experience of reconstructing our understanding of family history. Travis and I developed a genuine friendship, unburdened by our father's manipulations. Even Amanda gradually softened her stance as the family business stabilized under new, transparent management. 1 year after the confrontation at the family reunion, I hosted a gathering at Windermere Cottage. It wasn't called a family reunion. That term carried too much baggage. Instead, I simply invited people who mattered to me. Caldwells, Harringtons, friends who had supported me through the ordeal, professionals who had helped bring the truth to light. My father, still serving his sentence, was notably absent. But his shadow no longer dominated the gathering. People mingled freely, sharing stories and building new connections. The rigid hierarchy that had characterized Caldwell family events was gone, replaced by a more egalitarian atmosphere. During that gathering, James pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the garden. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small package. "It belonged to your mother." Inside was a delicate silver locket containing a tiny photograph of my mother holding me as an infant. On the back was engraved, "My greatest love, my greatest hope." "She gave it to me just before she ended our relationship," James explained. "Said she needed to commit to her marriage for your sister's sake, but wanted me to have this reminder of what we'd shared. I've kept it all these years." I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling a connection to my mother I hadn't experienced since childhood. Later that evening, as the gathering was winding down, I found myself sitting on the porch with Sophie, watching the sunset over the Berkshire Hills. "Grandmother Eleanor would be proud," she said, gesturing to the diverse group of people laughing and talking in the garden. "This is what family should be." "People who choose to be in each other's lives," I agreed. "Not just bound by obligation or blood." "Speaking of which," Sophie said with a knowing smile, "when are you going to tell everyone your news?" I touched my stomach gently. At 3 months pregnant, I wasn't showing yet, but I confided in Sophie the previous week. "Soon," I promised. I'm still getting used to the idea myself. The baby, grandmother Eleanor's great-grandchild, James's grandchild, represented something I hadn't dared hope for during the darkest days of the family conflict, a future not defined by past betrayals. A new branch of the family tree that could grow in healthier soil. As the last guests departed and night fell over Windermere Cottage, I stood in the doorway watching headlights wind down the long driveway. 1 year earlier, I had received a cold letter of exclusion and responded with a simple "understood." That understanding had led me on a journey I couldn't have imagined, painful at times, but ultimately healing. Family, I had learned, was not a fixed concept but a fluid one. It could be toxic or nurturing, limiting or expansive. The true meaning of family wasn't determined by DNA or legal documents, but by how we treat one another, the truths we're willing to acknowledge, and the forgiveness we're capable of extending. My hand rested on my stomach, where a new life was beginning. This child would know both sides of their heritage, the complicated Caldwell history and the welcoming Harrington embrace. They would know that their mother had fought for truth, not out of vengeance, but out of a belief that honesty, however difficult, was the only foundation worth building upon. That simple text, "understood," had been just the beginning. The understanding I had gained since then was the true inheritance, more valuable than any property or portfolio. And that was a legacy worth passing on. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I'd be grateful to hear about your own experiences with family justice or reconciliation. Have you ever had to stand up for truth within your family? What was the hardest part? The most healing? Your insights help me feel less alone in this journey and might help others facing similar challenges. Please take a moment to like this video if you found value in my story, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more about navigating complex family dynamics and finding peace after betrayal. Share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes family is who we choose, and that choosing truth, however painful, ultimately leads to healing. Thank you for witnessing my journey from that cold letter of rejection to the new beginning I've found. Sometimes the most powerful response to rejection is simply "understood," followed by the courage to seek truth and create the family you deserve. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.